The Irish potato famine, or the Great Hunger, was a devastating time for all Irish. The famine years was a tragic period in Irish history between 1845 and 1851. During the Great Famine, over 1 million Irish died of hunger or disease.
The angel of death and desolation reigned supreme in Ireland.
More than 1.5 million people were forced to immigrate. The famine immigrants flocked to many cities along the east coast of North America and have had long-lasting effects on all the places in which they have settled. The Irish influence was felt dramatically in Boston. They have shaped the social, religious, and political culture of the city. Famine struck Ireland in 1845 without warning. The potato crops became infested with a fungus, Phytophthora infestans, turning the leaves black and rotting the potato.
The air was laden with a sickly odor of decay, as if the hand of death had stricken the potato field, and that everything growing in it was rotten.
One of the great misunderstandings about the potato famine is that it was just a problem with the potato. This wasn't an agricultural accident sense. This was an example of man's inhumanity to man.
Giles Keegan, a village schoolmaster, kept a journal of his tumultuous famine experiences. He wrote,
"It is such a contradiction that in one of the richest agricultural lands in the world, people are dying of hunger. They are not allowed to consume the products of the soil except potatoes. Food is being shipped under armed guard from every port in Ireland. We are the victims of England's economic policies."
Failure of crops left the Irish impoverished, facing mass evictions. The lack of nourishment left them vulnerable to pestilence.
Thousands are dying in a state of abandonment without even the luxury of a burial trench. Some have been found dead by the side of the road with grass in their mouth.
The government set up soup kitchens and distributed ration cards. It wasn't enough to ease the suffering. Religious persecution was widespread. Often the soup was offered only upon the condition they denounced the Catholic faith and pledge allegiance to the Anglican faith.
In my heart, I didn't announce anything. The children are starving. I had to get them something to eat.
At a certain point, the English government decided not to feed the Irish, to let them more or less fend for themselves. But one of the things they did was they set up what are called the workhouses or the poorhouses. The poorhouses were really a way to organize the deaths of the Irish peasant class who refused to leave Ireland.
Disease was wild. Some workhouses produced more than 100 corpses a week. Bodies were thrown into mass graves and left untended. The starvation became so awful, families were overwhelmed with grief, watching loved ones claimed by the scourge. Boston was the first U.S. city to extend assistance to Ireland by sending $150,000 in aid. A group of wealthy Bostonian Protestants organized relief efforts that distributed food supplies to Ireland.
Share your last loaf of bread with those unfortunate souls whose wild shrieks of famine and despair can be heard across the Atlantic.
In spite of these efforts, the situation in Ireland worsened. Landlords made an offer that to many seemed like the only alternative.
"There is no hope for you as long as you remain in Ireland. The only means of improving your situation is to leave the country. All those who are in arrears for rent will be forgiven."
Hope was raised and the mass immigration began. For many, it felt like exile. In the Gaelic language, the act of leaving Ireland was described by the word diori. Diori translates not as immigration, but as exile. The landlords benefited in financing a family's exodus from Ireland. The vessels used to cross the Atlantic were so crudely constructed they were often referred to as coffin ships.
Hundreds of poor people huddled together, wallowing in filth, the atmosphere foul. They were sick in body, dispirited in heart, dying without spiritual consolation.
The mortality rate was high. The survivors held hope of salvation in America. The Irish arrived unsure of what to expect. Large numbers settled in other urban areas where diverse immigrant groups had already made their homes. The Irish who settled in these cities were part of a melting pot of cultures. Being accepted into these communities was somewhat different than the Boston Irish experience.
You know, the Irish who came here were the poorest of the poor. They were not looked kindly upon by the old Yankee or white Anglo-Saxon Protestant classes.
The early Irish immigrants had been strong and healthy, and many had skills that could benefit the local economy. The famine Irish were not so hardy. Most arrived weak and unskilled.
The famine Irish were a massive lump in the community, undigested and undigestible.
The Irish immigrants that flooded Boston in 1847 caused alarm, and the Boston City Council established the Joint Committee on Alien Passengers to address problems created by the refugees. The committee's first report, dated May 20th, 1847, described the conditions in the city poorhouse.
The House of Industry is overrun with destitute immigrants, many of whom are prostrate with typhus fever, in a most deplorable condition and exceedingly filthy and unfit to mingle with ordinary inmates.
A petition signed by 1,000 Bostonians that same year reads,
Our government has provided for our own poor with substantial buildings like the House of Industry, but it is not right or proper and very unwise and unkind to mix foreign poor and paupers with our people.
The petition's authors further described the Irish.
I have seen them sitting on the side of the road in Ireland, picking vermin from under their armpits. In fact, they are too lazy to wash themselves.
It would be an uphill battle for the Boston Irish as they faced an atmosphere of ridicule and prejudice.
When we first came here, a lot of us couldn't get jobs because the political powers said that the Irish were inferior. We obviously know that that wasn't the case then, isn't the case today. We know that no matter what your skin color is or ethnic background, you know, there's that great American thought that after all, we all are created equal.
The Irish were faced over and over again with signs reading, "No Irish need apply." They were treated as a class all by themselves. Gradually, the Irish of Boston began setting up small businesses, most notably taverns. These taverns served as meeting houses for the Irish community, much as village pubs had in Ireland. They were not simply a place to drink, but also a community social center. They soon developed into a kind of political headquarters in neighborhoods. The Irishmen would gather and discuss religion and politics. The local tavern provided a ready-made stage for the street corner speeches of an emerging political force.
The men who assumed leadership roles in Boston had strong personalities and ruled their neighborhoods with gentle smiles and iron fists. They encouraged people to become citizens, register to vote, and saw to it they did. The political machine was born. It is considered an Irish gift to America.
All was fair in Boston politics as far as the Irish were concerned. It was a struggle to gain power and status in a city that relegated them to a permanent underclass. Politics was a path to success. It was a path the Irish chose with gusto and determination.
By the late 1800s, the political tide had turned, and the Irish controlled the leadership roles in the city.
Because we stuck together, and because we began to really believe in the great promises of America, promises like, you know, one person, one vote, that we're created equal, that we're all entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we started to take the promises of America as Irish Americans and hold it up to the rest of the community. We started to demand our rights.
The Irish political machines produced many colorful leaders, including Martin the Mahatma Lumsden, and an extraordinarily powerful player in the new Boston political scene, John Honey Fitz Fitzpatrick, grandfather of John F. Kennedy. Honey Fitz promised a bigger, better, busier Boston. He was often criticized for his use of patronage for civil service jobs and a firm believer in quid pro quo. James Michael Curley, first elected mayor in 1915, opened City Hall to the people. He brought neighborhoods together to form a loyal basis of support in return for patronage. When John Fitzgerald Kennedy was elected president, Irish, Catholic, and Bostonian pride swelled.
No matter how many other presidents of Irish descent there may be, the Kennedy presidency was a unique Irish passage, the end of second-class citizenship in America for Irish and for Catholics in general. A lot has happened between the hunger and the presidency.
The Irish came to Boston seeking a better life. Leaving their beloved homeland was a bitter decision. The Irish pulled themselves ashore, not knowing what their future would hold or the impact they would have on Boston. They survived, they endured, and they prospered. The Finn experience is being commemorated in Boston this summer with a memorial